All right, welcome everyone to the product roundtable for July 2024. I am really excited to have our special guest here and our co-host, Gamemakers and Joseph Kim. And of course, let's see here. Have you guys have the presentation in front of you? We're going to go through a little bit of a background of the game really quickly. I think everyone knows the game. Some opening discussion questions. Then we're going to talk about the impact. We're going to do a teardown. And then we're going to have like a deep discussion point. But at any point we want to jump into talking, I think that's really the most valuable part of this. So please feel free to, JK. Obviously, we're excited about your thoughts, but if anyone else has stuff, we all appreciate it. I don't like to hear myself speak for an hour. It's really early. My voice is kind of raspy already. All right. The cool thing about Keynote we have right now is we do have like live videos, which is really cool. So I think everyone's familiar with Brawl Stars at this point, but it is a fast-paced multiplayer online battle game. Players choose from a variety of characters known as brawlers, each having unique abilities. The game offers multiple modes and maps and provides a diverse gameplay experience. Anecdotally, I have three boys, 11, 9, and 7, and Brawl Stars, I mean, we all know from the numbers is blown up, but my goodness, in like my community, kids went from Roblox to Fortnite, all to Brawl Stars at this point. So like when they get on their devices in the morning, Brawl Stars is where it's at for all the kids, at least in my area these days, anecdotally. I don't know if that's the same for you, JK, but
Yeah, maybe a couple of things I could point out that I think from a game design or product success perspective are very interesting to me. But when you think about like the kinds of games that have been successful from a battle royale perspective, like most of those games have been 3D, right? And for me, it's interesting to see how an isometric game could be as successful with that kind of a format. It's something that there's a lot of theories, and especially talking to actually some former Riot guys, where there are a lot of theories about why that is, and a lot of depth and nuance behind why some people think that it's able to be successful. I think that the second thing that's very interesting about Brawl Stars is like for me, I think that it's interesting to note that when you look at a game like Wild Rift, for example, and or just a general MOBA with the depth that it has in terms of the strategy, the progression in game, a lot of the lanes, the roles, and things of that nature. Brawl Stars, in comparison, is very shallow, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but from a gameplay perspective, it's very shallow gameplay wise. But then the other thing that we note is that in a game like Wild Rift, you only have a single mode. And I think that one theory I have is because of that depth is why you need the additional modes to keep the game interesting to players. Whereas when you think about a game like Wild Rift, it has enough depth, which is why it seems to orient around a single mode. These are just theories that I have. And then I would say that the final point for me is just anecdotally, again, I don't have the data, I don't know for sure, but when I talk to a lot of kids about the games they play and Brawl Stars comes up a lot, I noticed that unlike other games, like Wild Rift, for example, there's a lot of girls that play Brawl Stars. And to me, that's an interesting phenomenon because when you look at shooters, for example, they're highly male dominated, except for Valorant. Valorant seems to be more female, like not more female, but has a greater percentage of female players. And Brawl Stars seems to be similar. And I think you can have a lot of theories around why that happens. But I just think from a game success perspective, there's a lot of lessons, in my opinion, about Brawl Stars and some of the characteristics of Brawl Stars that are very interesting. Anyway,
yeah,
sorry.
no, that's great. I want to add to that we had a 5 kid sleepover, so that's 8 kids, and this is just a, small focus group, but I did ask them why they like Brawl Stars, and their answer was game modes. They felt like Other games, you're playing the same thing over and over again, and Brawl Stars allows them to switch. And when I was listening, they would switch. Hey, let's play this mode. Let's play this mode. Let's play that mode. And I think some of that comes from their past of experience with Roblox, which has so many modes and options for different players and different desires in those moments. Secondly, there's somewhat of a decline in Fortnite, and I asked about that, and that's around this like new vehicle experience that's just taken out the like strategy. So there's sort of in some ways Brawl Stars benefiting from some changes Fortnite did that the players don't like. So those two things um, I think have contributed to their growth. Awesome. I mean, we're here to talk about Brawl Stars generally, but we're also really focused on the Godzilla event that introduced a new game mode, limited time hero upgrades, which is a really, really important part of this conversation, cosmetics, loot boxes, and a club event. I'm going to jump in with something a little bit contentious of a discussion point. JK, I mean, I'd love to hear your thoughts, but like you don't have to jump in on it because this is a tough one. Obviously, Supercell's gone back and forth on loot boxes. At this point, like, how do we feel as a community about loot boxes morally, in terms of monetization? Is it good or bad long term? What do you guys think? And love to hear other people chatting, maybe Carson, Pavel. I know you guys have a lot of thoughts.
I personally think the loot boxes have been proven to be successful in terms of the monetizing. They definitely bring that surprise and the dopamine hit. So I think they can be. I tend to believe they can be done in a sustainable way as opposed to if you take it to the extreme, I don't know, an RPG like a Marvel Strike Force or something like that. I think they can be done better. Where it brings the revenue and it also gives the players, this the dopamine that they're looking for.
Yeah, my personal opinion on loot boxes is that for me, I don't view it as good or bad. I just view it as a tool. And so I really think more about the demographic or the player profile. Like who are you going, who's your audience? And depending on the audience would determine do loot boxes make sense or not. So I have more simple view on that.
Yeah. It seems like the heat around loot boxes has died down a little bit. I mean, I think it was in public eye a lot more a few years ago. Awesome. And then the event introduces a huge variety of Godzilla themed content. And I had to kind of like look into this morning, but this was through a collaboration with Toho Co., which is the creator of Godzilla. And I don't know if you've ever watched it, but I've heard really great things about Godzilla Minus One being an awesome movie. I haven't been able to catch it. Kind of a unique IP, right? Not your classic like huge IP ticket item. So that's kind of an interesting point. Given that we have discussion going, I'm going to kind of skip through because we are going to talk about the event very quickly. If you have access to the report, you know that we analyzed it in the report, but the event led to a very large, close to 60% increase in revenue, 3 weeks over 3 weeks, actually marking the highest weekly revenue for Brawl Stars. And then downloads almost more than doubled during this period. The early release of new heroes and launch of the themed battle pass also contributed to this revenue spike. Um, but Godzilla event was the only new content during this run. So there were other things that released that likely contributed to that revenue. And in the report, you have links to all of the details of these events. One thing to note, though, when you look at on an aggregate level of what type of mechanics are working well in the core market, expansion events, which is what we categorize this as, and defining expansion events there, when a game adds a new play area, like a room, world, and in this case, a mode, they are doing very well and pretty consistent in the core market with a median revenue impact of about 4% week over week and a standard deviation of 35%. So these events are reliable methods in boosting player engagement and revenue without the volatility seen in other type of events like in interactions, challenges, and rewards. And if you're familiar with our impact portal, this comes from our lift tool, so you can dive into even more specific numbers based on subgenre, genre, etc. Looking at it in a genre level, although the strategy, the only thing about this is the count numbers get pretty low. So you have only like 3 of these in strategy, but you can see some differences based on the genre here. All right, just going into the details of the event. And again, like feel free to jump in and stuff with comments. We don't necessarily have to go through it, but I just sometimes when we have these, people aren't really familiar with the exact details of the event. So during the event, and this is a big part of it, players earn eggs, which are the real loot box element of this event. And they earn it from this new mode called the Godzilla City Smash game mode. They also earn the eggs from daily win bonuses, and then there's a free offer in the app shop and then IAPs. So on the left here on the bottom image, you can see that there's free offers that they can get eggs from just engaging in the IAP page or buy store or whatever you want to call it. Eggs are also awarded in a eggs award an event specific upgrade called mutations, and I'll show you. Let's see if I can play this. Yeah, you can see this on the right here. This is a mutation on the right here for the eggs will award a random hero, but they also award cosmetics and upgrade materials. Mutations provide a unique enhancement to the hero's ability, base attacks, and movement speed and health, and they're only active in specific game modes. The other really interesting thing about this event that is going to be a part of the discussion, and feel free to jump in now if you want, is that all the mutations expired at the end of the event. So this was a point of contention among players because obviously some of them spent money to get these mutations, and ultimately at the end of the event they expired. In addition, I kind of like going through this kind of quickly here, but any thoughts there so you don't guys listen to me speak. We do have like a discussion part, but we don't have to wait till that part.
Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting aspect of this is not only the what you mentioned in terms of the time limited nature, but I think the mutations also impacted multiple game modes, right? And so now you're talking about the potential for this feature to skew the game more pay to win rather than being viewed as more fair. So I can see why revenue would definitely be impacted, especially if it affects other game modes. But yeah, I think this is the delicate balance that as game developers, you have to really try to understand the impact of some of these features that could potentially drive revenue, but then may cause some player backlash. And so I definitely think that this event in particular was interesting from the aspect that you mentioned in terms of the time limited nature, but also impacting different uh, other game modes as well, and the potential to have players view this game as more pay to win.
So I have a quick question. So the mutation gave you a bonus, right? And it was for limited time only. And then when this event was over, those mutations went away. So I can see how people would be upset, right? Because they would spend money on this, and then it kind of goes away. Do you guys think long term is that something that Brawl Stars do? They bring a lot of limited time events, and then do they bring them? Like, do they bring them back? Is it like something on a consistent basis? Do they bring the events back? The previous ones, like the ones that run from a year ago or so.
Well, this was recently released, so we don't know if they plan on bringing it back. But I think that is one tack. They certainly didn't market that they were going to, Pavel. So I, it's TBD, I guess, is probably the best way. I think if they were planning on doing it, they would include it in the marketing. You can see the marketing message here on the right as I pause the video. It says it's mutated for 19 days, right? And then you have the available modes that have a little icon on it, but there's no mention of it coming back necessarily. And considering this is a collaboration with an IP, I'm guessing that it's TBD. Like I'm guessing that they didn't put that into their terms or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, if you look historically, though, I don't see a lot of IP integrations being done multiple times. I guess it's possible. But one other point I wanted to make, Brett, was like the time limited nature of this is probably makes the people who paid, maybe they feel bad, but the people who didn't pay, they probably feel better, right? Because like your typical audience doesn't want these kind of pay to win uh, bonuses there in especially in other game modes. So I think to some degree, by taking it away, you then don't piss off some of your other players who could potentially accept the fact that other people in the game are paying for these mutations and getting these specific bonuses. But they you know, if they realize that it's going to go away after some time, then they may consider the game more fair.
So you're saying that it's because it's temporary that allow them to do this sort of paid to win experience for a little while. Is kind of
I think so. I mean, yeah, I think this is why this event to me is interesting because we kind of see the impact of doing things like this. And you know, when you look at the comments or the some of the YouTubers speaking about this event, you see different views on how people are viewing this event. But clearly, from a revenue perspective, it was very successful.
I just wanted to make a comment that playing the event, for me at least, I was able to gather a lot of mutations without spending any money. So I don't see it's hard for me to understand if a lot of people actually spend on mutations. Because I remember that the AAPs were mutations were part of the tiers, but then you had at the end the new hypercharge skin, which I think that they try to also use within the event. But yeah, you could easily get at least 10 or 15 mutations just by playing some hours with the game. I remember collecting a lot of different mutations, and yeah, it wasn't like a hard thing to do if you were just following the gameplay.
And Pedro, were you part of a clan?
I was part of a clan, yeah.
Yeah, and then how did you feel about the clan? Well, I think Brett will probably go into this later, but how did you feel about the other members of your clan and potentially, you know, being able to get that skin based upon, you know, whether your clan members also paid and things like that?
Yeah, actually, with my clan, we weren't able to get the hypercharge skin. For me, the hypercharge skin never was like this huge driver. I can understand why it can be for some players, especially if you are a collector who have already several brawlers with the hypercharge, and you want like this new visual of it. But for me, it wasn't really the point. We were pretty far for completing it. I think that Supercell's been trying to encourage club engagement for a while.
Yep.
And if you've seen their brawl talks and everything that they launch, they always try to have like this message, right? Like play with your club all of the time. It's pretty constant. But for me, yeah, personally, the Hypercharge skin was not like a hot thing to pursue. Like I didn't feel bad for not getting it. I was more interested on how I was able to experiment with different brawlers, which I didn't use before, or which I was a little bit bored. And it became like a new experience trying them again with these mutations, right? Which I thought it was cool. Like at the end of the day, they want you to invest in more characters in an horizontal way and vertical way. And I think that they kind of did that in a way, but in a way it's also tricky because at the end you lose the mutation. So I wonder if there was a way to also re-engage the audience with some brawlers again. But yeah, it's kind of hard to say because at the end of the event you lose it. So I wonder how that leaves you, right? But yeah, it's an interesting topic.
Yeah, so for those unfamiliar with the rest of the event, they also, what we're discussing right now is for players and clubs, opening eggs filled a shared club meter. that awarded premium currency to all members at milestones. And then, as we were just talking about, completing the meter awarded an exclusive skin, which you can see here on the left, the hypercharged skin, to all club members. So that was released in conjunction with all of this. And then just quickly for those less familiar with this event, there was also a limited time 3v3 game mode. And in that game mode, players could transform into Godzilla by picking up power-ups and gaining, and in doing so, they would gain health and damage along with unique abilities. This also included an exclusive map where teams competed to destroy each other's buildings, and that resulted in earning egg loot boxes. So I think you can see this on the left here. Uh, Godzilla is this character here. Only one player could be Godzilla at a given time, I think. Oh no, actually, that's not true. It doesn't look like it. I think
Well, I think
one
on
player
each
per
side,
team,
one player
one player
becomes.
each time. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
What did you think of the game mode itself? I mean, I didn't play it, but like I read a lot of the comments about it. It seems like it was kind of controversial what people thought about the game mode itself.
From my perspective, I prefer other game modes, to be honest, because basically the one who got to be Godzilla would
You're at
basically
a
trash
disadvantage,
everything.
right?
Yeah. If you're
Yeah.
Godzilla, then you can destroy a lot more. So the other players that I felt like didn't really matter at all. The other two players, like for me, it was a very weird mode for Brawl Stars in a way that I didn't feel like I could control the results at the end, which is cool. But also, if you get to use like the enhanced version of Godzilla, you have an advantage, and it's very hard for you to get killed unless everything is pretty organized. But the whole point of destroying the other city, yeah, it didn't feel as exciting as I thought it would feel.
Well, what do you guys think of the Godzilla IP in particular? I mean, it's somewhat niche. I mean, I see why it fits into Brawl Stars, but it's not a big ticket item, right? I mean, people aren't playing. I mean, it's not compared to a Marvel or something like that, right? There's so many other options that they could have used as an IP. Uh, it's kind of interesting that they went with Godzilla.
I don't know. I think, but for Brawl Stars, it to me it makes sense, and I think like if you look at some of the skins and the art in the game, I thought they did an excellent job. So I don't know. For me, it feels like it was a pretty good IP choice. And sometimes you just don't know. Like some IP with certain games just have a huge impact. I remember when I was at Sega, we did an IP integration for Sonic Dash with Pac-Man, and wow, that IP integration, more than doubled down. So
Yeah, I would
Yes.
agree. I think we see that with IP and we see that with marketing. We see that with YouTube collaborations and celebrities. It's not necessarily just the big ticket person that works well. I'm thinking of an example in Casino where Brandon Fraser, I think it was, is like a huge hit in Scientific Games used him, I think it was it Brandon Fraser? It was kind of a just like a random, not he's not random, but he's certainly not A list in terms of
he's the
celebrities.
the mummy guy, right?
Yeah, I think that was who it was. I could be wrong. I'll have to double check. Jennifer, double check because I know we wrote about that, but I actually kind of love this because I can't imagine it was super expensive. Like I went to the website, they had one blog post about it, and it is pretty cool and it integrates really well with the game. So I'm assuming they got a pretty good deal on this versus going for something that's pretty blown out, right? Like Marvel or something like that. Um, he, okay. Nice, Goldie. All right. Well, yeah, jumping, I mean, we've kind of talked about this, but this was a really big component of it. So I do want to get a little bit more in the weeds here, is that the event primarily drove the spend through this limited time hero upgrades. from earnable and purchasable loot boxes, right? The eggs. And then these upgrades, the mutations, they did provide a significant advantage. As we talked about, it did feel in some ways pay to win, but we're getting intel that it was also very easy to earn them through engagement. And it was only specific to certain modes. So I mean, even another discussion point is the complexity of this event, right? Like if you're making a purchase, you have to really make it clear to the player that the value of the purchase is temporary. The value of the purchase is only for certain game modes. What do you think are the risks associated with this? And do you think this is a good thing long term to integrate? I mean, it obviously it seems to have driven revenue in the short term, but we have seen other examples that drive revenue short term and actually hurt revenue in the long term. What are your guys' thoughts here?
One thing you guys can maybe help me understand, did the mutations expired at the end of the event and the cosmetics as well, or do the cosmetics persist even if the gameplay affecting aspect of the mutations
I
expire?
think the cosmetics persist, but the bonuses and mutations after the end of the time period expire.
Okay, gotcha.
So when they
Just the
purchase,
skin, just the one skin. Just the one skin persisted, Carson.
Okay.
And then the mutations, this hypercharged skin.
Yeah, so the guild skin basically persisted, and there were not skins associated with other.
There were other brawler skins, weren't there?
Yeah, that's what I thought it
Yeah.
seemed to say.
Yeah, there was exclusive cosmetics. That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
but the mutations weren't tied to skins, right? They didn't come together.
No.
Okay. Yeah, I'm very curious because one of the ways they could have done it is if you purchase, let's say, a skin and the mutation, a mutation goes away, but skin stays. This way you can say, hey, at least you got whatever, you got what you
Yeah.
paid for, etc. But they didn't do that, right? They just if you purchase the gacha box for the mutation and it's gone away. Yeah, I'm very curious in terms of the legal, especially somewhere in Europe, because I know they're pretty big in Europe as well. If there's any noise that's surrounding things that people buy that go away, I don't know if there's any specific laws in the European Union about that, but I'd be very curious to actually see how how it goes.
Well, I think if you looking at that screenshot, right, they try to make it clear that it's temporary. So open eggs for a chance to find temporary mutations, temporary event. So I don't know. I think from a communication perspective, it seems like they're trying to be clear at least that the mutations are temporary.
Okay.
Yeah, but I get what Pavel's saying because it does add additional layer to the loot box narrative. Because not only is it a loot box, but it's a temporary ownership loot box, right? Which is, I mean, I'm obviously not a lawyer, but it is another layer to the mechanic that they don't really own the power up. It's a temporary boost.
Were the prices were the gacha for this cheaper than general loot box, like the other loot boxes? Do you know what the prices were? Because I'm kind of thinking there's another trend in some of the Asian games or some of the shooters games where you can rent the equipment, right? For example, but it's generally for very cheap price, like $1.99 for a week, and you can have the super duper gun or whatever, right? I'm kind of thinking maybe it's kind of the same thing. Maybe they made it cheaper, but it's like a temporary rental. Maybe that's how they can swing it. I don't know.
Jennifer, can you put the price points in the chat when you get a chance?
Yeah. I think the other thing to note is that the other advantage of making the advantages and bonuses temporary is that you don't have power inflation or as much power inflation, right? So I think that's certainly a problem from a systems design perspective, is that every additional feature or system that you introduce that adds to player power or some of the brawler power is going to be very difficult to balance. And so if you make it temporary, you can just add that power and take it away. But then you just run into some of the issues that we talked about in terms of from a payer perspective, how do you view something that's only temporary?
Shay, do
Yeah,
you
and,
want to jump in with your thoughts on the economy? Or you want to just stay in
sure.
chat?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, I'm new to this event, so I've been just sort of following along. Economically, though, yeah, I think I really like this approach. I think from a payer's perspective, I don't know exactly what the progression was to the skins. It sounds like it was a team event, but if there's an aspiration where you have a better chance or a guarantee of some sort of exclusive content, that might be enough to justify it from a payer's perspective. But also, it seems like a really fun event with a lot to engage with. You could look at it as a sunk cost for entertainment, temporary entertainment, like going to a theme park. Um, Maybe you go home with, some tchotchkes or whatever, but mostly you paid for the experience. Um, so yeah, I was reading some Reddit posts from players who were complaining, but between the lines, it looked like they had a good time, you know? So you're always going to get a mixed bag. But I think the temporary loot boxes and the transient effect on the economy with only decorative items persisting, it feels like a safe bet. They probably will try it again, I assume, maybe with some tweaks. But yeah, economically, it seems like a really smart move.
Yeah, in terms of return on investment, let's say, of the spend on this event, I think something super simple, but just looking at the screenshots as I'm not super familiar with the event, I think makes sense is the gems. Like gems have an inherent value. You can just use them anytime, anywhere. So the fact that you could get gems just by doing better in this event, I think it's already a pretty good motivation to, out as, having a net positive outcome of the event as well. And definitely maybe a good reason to spend as well.
כי גיליתי שיש לי עוד פגישה
Let's see. There's some questions in the chat that we'll answer as we're going along here. Yeah, I think, well, I mean, we've seen this in the past. Events are a great way, as Shane mentioned, to experiment with certain ideas, right? Because they're lower risk. The other thing that we have talked about that Supercell has done well, particularly in Brawl Stars, is with the loot boxes, having this tiered reward system in terms of ROI and likely to get it, right? So if you've watched our economy roundtables, or if you're interested in other type of loot box type system that Supercell Brawl Stars has released, I highly recommend checking it out, because they do a really nice job of a really high value element that's hard to get, sort of a medium tier element, and then a lower tier. And you can kind of see that here, although it doesn't sound like the skin is that desired, so it doesn't seem like they did that. That's really the high end. It's sort of like they did a medium to high tier reward, which is this mutation, which allows you to have a better experience. But I wonder if they could have done a better job of having something that was permanent and even more valuable to get players super excited about getting these loot boxes. Because I don't really feel that in this system.
I mean, I would probably argue that if you are adding these pay to win elements, especially if it's impacting brawler power, that you take a fairly potentially existential risk and completely hosing your game if you do make it permanent. So I like the fact that they did make it limited time, so that you can add, because the benefits of this is that you don't introduce a potentially existential risk to your game. And you also, by making the event a good experience by, giving players free things, and then the free players are like, oh, well, this event is cool because I get free stuff. And then they also, can also justify the fact that there are pay to win elements by thinking, okay, well, these other players, they're going to get these bonuses, but it's only for a certain amount of time, after which we're going to go back to normal. So I think that it was a good way of kind of like walking the tightrope between their free players and their pay to win players. And yeah, so for me, I would think that like introducing permanent power is so dangerous that for me, I would think that you would definitely want it to be limited time. The thing that's surprising to me about this event is just how much effort it is, right? In terms of a new power thing, you gotta change UI, you're introducing a game mode. Like, just how much effort and how expensive this event is just crazy in my opinion. And so I think, like, for other developers that are thinking of this kind of event, I think you really gotta think very carefully about whether it's worth this time and expense to do. And so you probably want to get the IP right. You probably want there's so many aspects of this design and so many interconnected parts of it that this is something that I think if you're going to do it, you really have to think carefully about it. And I think overall, I would say I think the Brawl Stars team did an amazing job on this event, except I think they could have done better on the game mode. That's the one area where, and again, I'm just going from a lot of the reviews and comments, that I think they potentially could have done a better job in making the game mode a little bit more fun and a little bit more balanced. I think the level design seemed to be getting a lot of good reviews, but the mode itself seemed to be kind of like not as positive overall. I don't know if
I mean,
anyone.
I think the other thing that they did, to your point, is they made it only applicable to certain modes. So if you really hate the pay to win concept as a non-payer, you can simply play a mode that the mutations aren't applied to, which is a really nice optionality built into the design of this mechanic, right?
Yeah, it's interesting if they could have done that on a permanent basis. Let's say they introduce a new mode that only the mutations they only work there, right? I mean, it kind of creates the mode of, I don't know, of spenders or something, but this way you can kind of keep the whatever it is that you're getting, right? As opposed to just lose it. But it's interesting, yeah.
Plus, Brawl Stars has never been, in all of Supercell's games, are never purely just competitive, right? Like, there is an element of pay to get an advantage, right? I mean, certainly Clash Royale, you can earn it, but generally, if you spend money, you're going to get some type of an advantage, right?
What do you guys I wanted to run this idea, but this kind of goes with so one of the themes that I'm kind of seeing in other games and stuff, and like one of the things that I'm exploring is this whole idea of games as a platform, even like something like like Brawl Stars, where they kind of just make more game modes, more different gameplays. It's a sports game, it's a whatever game. Right now, it's mostly temporary, right? It kind of goes away. But I'm kind of have this idea is like, this is where like it seems to be converging towards this more like you log into Brawl Stars and you can do whatever. You can play a sports game, you can play a soccer game, you can do whatever. And it's like, this is kind of like, do you guys think that those are like this is the path towards this like games as a platform for Brawl Stars and for other games?
I think it's kind of situational. It certainly makes sense because it seems like that's how Brawl Stars is oriented. I think even in a game like Clash Royale, you have different modes at times, although more event focused, right? Like touchdown mode and other modes. I see, like in League, I see the efforts in introducing different modes, and even like PvE modes and things like that. So I don't know. I think for a game like League Wild Rift, I think it's going to be much more difficult because kind of discussed at the beginning, because of the depth, and people are so fixated on a single game mode that's hard to, I think, compete against, or to build another mode that is as compelling. So yeah, for me, I think it would depend on the game. But certainly Brawl Stars has that potential, I think.
Mhm.
I
I think
mean, I
I
think,
think Claire had
yeah,
a question about whether there's some kind of leaderboard for this event to draw players to want to be the best players during the event, or was it
yeah,
simply a deal thing? I don't know.
yeah. Jennifer is gonna look into that. I don't know if anyone knows the answer to that off the top, but I
Okay.
don't believe so. I didn't see it in the teardown. But I will double check. And to your question, Pavel, it's an interesting question. I mean, I can see the advantage of it because you're basically creating a game that is competing with more areas, more genres, more subgenres, whatever you want to call it. It's offering more to a player. At the same time, strategically, that can weigh you down, and and particularly if you need concurrency of players to drive the experience, the more modes you have, the less likely you're going to have a really good concurrent experience, and the more things you have to upgrade, update, right? So
That's where Supercell has an advantage with their opponent AI tech. So,
yeah,
but yeah, most smaller developers,
meaning that you're just playing against bots if you're
yes.
yeah.
So I think the bigger companies like Supercell, Tencent in particular, have incredible opponent AI technology. They've invested tons of money in that area. So, I mean, and Supercell, I think in particular, has a philosophy of speed, right? Whether it's for loading time or whether it's for match times. And so I do think that's an area where having that kind of technology enables you. So I totally agree with your point, Brett, which is that especially if you're a smaller studio, you've got a cold start problem when you're launching a game and you're introducing a bunch of modes that could kill your game because you don't want super long match times to essentially split your audience. But to the degree that if you are able to figure out opponent AI to be able to quickly match players, then you would basically be better able to enable things like additional modes and things like that. Oh, Goldie's saying that it's detectable in Squad Busters. I think that so there's two types of AI from a Tencent perspective, or this is what I've heard. I don't want to don't sue me, Tencent, but from what I've heard is that they've got two AI. One is the AI opponent AI that is intended to be detectable. So if you were to play, you know, whatever in any of these shooter games or even Honor of Kings or things like that, there's AI that they intend you to detect, and then there's AI which they believe is completely undetectable, to the extent that some of these multiplayer games they don't even consider to be PvP games. They consider them to be PvE.
But they want players to think that it's PvP.
Yes.
Hmm.
And you can, based upon the sophistication of your opponent AI, you can more finely craft the player experience to optimize monetization.
Yeah, I know in my discussions with on other shooter in the shooter game analysis we did, the new user experience was critical. This was critical for the new user experience, right? Like the curve of how competitive the game was really important for teams to control, and the only way they could control that would be to use AI. In the beginning, they would have, like you said, AI that was obvious AI for super beginners, and then they would integrate fake real players, but that like experience of being challenged but not destroyed was super important to the new user retention curve.
Yeah, I see a comment here by Goldie. You don't see the opponent AI bots in Clash Royale, so you're not intended to know that they're bots. So, yeah, but the word on the street is that Supercell has very, very good opponent AI tech.
Yeah. I mean, in Clash Royale, which I play a lot, there are moments where I'm like, this has to be a AI. I mean, they're just not. They're just be actions that sometimes don't really make sense.
Yeah, or even in
Particularly,
some of the clan events, how quickly you can match, it's like that's a little too fast.
yeah, or like particularly if you're winning and it's like the game's over, it'll still continue to be battling with like 10 seconds left, and you're like, uh, I mean, there's just like no way of them winning the game, but they're still placing characters on the base, and you're like, there's 10 seconds left and there's no possible. So there's just moments where I'm playing the game and I'm either like, well, and I'm at a high enough level where anyone who's a real person would not be making that action.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. Pablo, I think you're from Riot, right? In Wild Rift. So this is my theory. I mean, you guys probably know more than
Eastern
me.
Blizzard, Eastern Blizzard. Oh,
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 you're
like,
from
oh,
Blizzard. Okay, okay,
yeah.
sorry. In Wild Rift, they try to actually indicate to you when you're playing against bots because in the match they'll show level 0. But I actually think that they have bots that you're not intended to know, but they do try to tell you that you're playing against bots at times.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, we only have 5 minutes left. I think we kind of talked about most of this stuff. But the one thing maybe we want to talk about a little bit is this idea of caps to the number of eggs earned from matches engagement at 14 every 4 days. But you could let players buy up to 162 eggs that could be opened immediately. And then buying all eggs cost about $100 and more than tripled the player's chances of all 40 mutations. So maybe this is our last talking point, but I don't know who chimed in that said they felt like they could, earn some of the mutations very easily. It sounds like they were pretty easy, but there was a cap on them. So kind of interesting that they were so prescriptive about what could be earned through engagement and what could be earned through purchasing. We don't have Philip here for economy. I'm not sure he joined. I know he was thinking about joining economy thoughts, but
Oh, there he
anyone
is.
have, is he? Oh, he is here. Philip. Maybe we'll see if I can call him out. Uh, any like thoughts on this type of system here?
You mean like limiting the freeloaders, limiting their wage rate?
Making a cap on what they could earn by just pure engagement, much less
Yeah.
than what they could earn by purchasing, and then also making it so clear. I mean, there's probably pretty easy ways to make it so that an engaged player didn't really know that they couldn't earn. Like in some games, for example, they just make the leveling curve so extreme that there's no way of earning past 14, but you don't really know that. It's not told to you. And here they're saying clearly you can only get so much by engaging.
So Squad Busters are in this too with like portal energy now. I mean, first of all, you got a backstop, which is kind of nice. Like if something weird happens in the game, if you give out like a bajillion, some of the integer values are wrong. Like it kind of functions as a soft cap against those issues, which is kind of nice. Like, oof, a lot of mistakes on Battlefront 2 and giving away too much XP. But like, what are you doing? You're basically saying your wage rate is 0 after you play X number of hours in the game. So like trade off in retention. Because I'm not earning wages I could have otherwise earned if I played, if I can't get that, that 15th egg or whatever the number is. But yeah, like, okay, that means like I'm gonna have to monetize more. So like to me, it's just a trade-off of like, okay, what's the additional engagement worth from the player playing past whatever the cap is in a counterfactual versus the additional revenue you get by having that cap. I mean, that's how I think about setting this up. You could test it too. That's how I think, even just as a thought experiment. So like, is that the revenue
Yeah.
maximizing solution? I mean, yeah, that sounds like the revenue maximizing solution. I mean, like, what if you set it to 0? What if players couldn't get any eggs from matches? I don't know. Like that would have the greatest like destructive retentive effect, but would have the greatest monetization effect.
I feel like it's pretty abrupt. I mean, I feel they could have probably created a much more gradual curve, right? Where you could have both very easily included and be pretty clear about it, right? Like you could just have this many games is gonna on average provide you with this many eggs, which is going to get you this many
You have to fractionalize though,
mutations.
because like you kind of have an integer problem of like there's only so much numeracy of like how many eggs you can have. So like you'd kind of have to do, if you want to do like a diminishing return. So like at every, let's say on the 15th, 16th, and 17th match, you face a decreasing amount of eggs you can earn. You have to fractionalize that. So you kind of have to make it like a probability, right? So like my probability of like getting an egg on the 15th match could be like 40%, and then on the, you know, the 16th match it's 30%. Like you could have a diminishing return curve there too, which would kind of solve this problem. I don't think you want rage rate to go to 0 after some point, because like that signals to players that like I'm ready to, I like why am I here? Like why am I showing up for work after 6 p.m. if I don't get any money? I'm
Yeah,
peacing out.
that's what I'm saying. Why don't they just gradually reduce it and say, well, you're going to get some type of return, but it's going to diminish over time,
Yeah, I'm on that train.
right?
I think that's the winning variant.
Yeah. I mean, it's just a like arbitrary number too, just randomly 14. Done.
Yep.
Like you couldn't just, and I've seen this in other games. King does this very well. If they are gonna release a loot box or something like that, they'll put the exact math right in the game, right? And I think they could have done that here if they're already doing 14 and 162. Why not just have like two gradual curves, right? Like if you spend, your likelihood to get it is X, and if you don't spend, your likelihood to get it is Y based on number of games, and that's the math.
Completely
And if you want to
reasonable.
spend, and if you want to spend all day playing these games to get every mutation, like we're all for it. Go for it.
Yep. I completely agree. It's just feature work. Like the hard cap is easy to enforce, right? It's an if then statement somewhere in the code.
Yeah, plus you could back into it based on engagement because you have a certain amount of days that the event is live, right? So assume that the maximum amount of gameplay in a day is 12 hours and the maximum amount of days the event was live was 20. Like then you have your max number and then you just back into that with some type of difficulty curve or like exponential curve on that, right? So that you're, and it seems like a fair, I mean, I don't want to make things they're always more difficult in actuality, obviously, but it seems like they could have made a pretty easy curve. Anyways, they did an excellent job with this. We're at an hour. It was an amazing discussion, as always. Joseph, Kim, thank you for joining us, and everyone else who chimed in, Pavel, Philip, everyone, Shane. Thank you for joining us. I hope we have these. We're planning on having these each month. If you're interested in being more of a contributor, DM me on LinkedIn or Slack or email. And this will be recorded and shared as always. And yeah, thank you everyone for joining us.
Thanks, Barrett.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Great stuff.